A lot of the things that you're doing to understand what product to build also helps marketing. Deeply understanding your audience is essential for building a great product that people want and need. It's also essential for doing marketing that gets noticed, resonates, and brings people to your product, right? So that is like a universal thing. Understand your audience, also understanding your market. By understanding your ecosystem, understanding what competitors have built, what the need is, what the problem is, who your audience is, who your ICPs are, like all of that translates over to marketing. So that's usually the place to start.
Emily, it's great to see you. We first connected back in January of 2021. You so generously let me hound you with, I think, a million questions about product-led growth. I, at that point, was just getting started with what would eventually become General Collaboration. I hadn't even quit my day job yet. And at that point, I believe you had only been working on Market One for a few months. So great to see you again. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. And I really didn't remember what our conversation was about when we just re-caught up. So I'm sorry about that. But I remembered meeting you, but I didn't remember the conversation. But it's great to reconnect.
It was a long time ago, and it was the infancy of both of our current day jobs. So so no hard feelings on that. So at this point, I mean, you've come a hell of a lot longer, or a hell of a lot further than I have in that time. You're now regarded as one of the greatest marketing minds, I think, in startup land. And you've been leading marketing at companies like Asana and Carta in the past. And now you've charted down this new path of founding Market One. Would love to start by just hearing, how did that come about? Why did you decide to start this? And what did it start to be, and what has it grown into?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you. That's a lovely compliment.
It's true. There's some really great content you've put out there. It's 100% true.
Yeah, I keep thinking I'm going to run out and then I don't. So that's good. So Market One started, I mean, like most great things, kind of by accident. I had left my job at Carta, and my co-founder Kathleen was thinking about her next move as well. And we were both kind of in this land of, do we want to go back and be marketing and operations leaders? Kathleen had been in a VP of Ops role more recently. So do we want to go back and do that? Do we want to start a venture-backed company? Do we want to advise and consult? Do we want to be investors? Like, we just didn't know. And so we were both in that same spot, and we started working together, advising companies together, essentially. And then from there, probably about the time I talked to you, a few months later, kind of had realized that we were going to keep doing this for various different reasons, some of them life circumstances, and some of them because we were having a good time doing it and thought we were really adding value. And then as it continued, it's taken on many different iterations over time. I think the goal and the purpose has always been that marketing is pretty misunderstood and often really under-leveraged in companies. And I think I can bridge that gap pretty well, given my set of experience, and just help people understand how to build and scale marketing, and help people understand how marketing works in general. And hopefully also I have this like sub goal of kind of elevating the status of marketing. I think marketing is often, not always thought of as like the, in the highest esteem. And I would love for that to shift. It's on like a personal note. Not always, but sometimes it's like people want to be in product and they don't necessarily want to be in marketing. And I love marketing. So as much as I can share that with other people, it's fun for me. So the goal has always been help people build marketing, help kind of elevate the understanding of marketing, not just for marketers, but founders. Have always had a mix of audiences between founders and marketers. And there's also, other execs and product leaders and sales leaders who consume content. And I've always done a mix of things. And so that's taken different forms. I've done advising, raised a fund that we finished investing out of earlier this year, and also write a newsletter. And so today my main focus is our newsletter, which is at about 50,000 subscribers. And also I advise 2 to 3 companies at a time, typically heads of marketing at Series A and growth startups. And so that's the mix of things I'm doing now, but it's kind of ever changing based on, I don't know, what I feel like doing. And now Market One is just me. Kathleen went the VC route recently, we had a fund, and then she decided to go in-house as a partner, and I decided to kind of move on from investing as my primary thing and move back to marketing because, as I said, I just really love it. So the point of all this is you don't have to follow along with all of the things, but I like people helping people build marketing and do that in lots of ways. And I think the newsletter is a long term thing until I run out of ideas, as I said.
I'd love to start by double clicking on something really interesting you just said that you feel like part of your mission is to make marketing more appreciated. Why do you think marketing is underappreciated? Do you have any theories on that?
Oh, I always say that, and then people ask me this question, so I should stop saying that because I don't. I mean, I think there's lots of things. I think marketing, it's hard to prove that it's working. I think it's just like much easier to prove that sales is working because it's kind of like at the end of the line. Marketing is a multidisciplinary function. I think it's more like product than like sales, especially when done well. In the sense that like you have design and you have people like you have developers in some situations are now like no code developers and for web and other things like that. And so it's this multidisciplinary function. It's focused on short and long term revenue, which is more like product than like sales, which is really focused more like quarterly and getting the deal done. And sales is a channel and marketing works across channels. So I won't go into, this. I've written about this marketing more like product than sales. But I think part of that is like there's a lot to understand when it comes to marketing. And I think people put it in this box like it's more like sales, and then you're missing half the things marketing does. I think the other thing is like, so it's hard to measure. People don't really understand, think it's more like sales, and then are disappointed when it's not sales or something like that. And then also, like I think there's a lot of bad habits and there's a lot of like rapid changes that happen. And so people get stuck doing old habits or old things and aren't like adapting to the new things. And so I don't know. It's a mix of those things. And either way, I think it's not often the most loved part of an organization.
That's interesting. So I don't know if we talked about this before. My wife is a product marketer. She's fortunate to be at Meta, which I think is one of the tech companies that I know. They really do value product marketing. Looking at what she's able to make there versus many of the other peers in that ballpark, it's interesting to see that they value it. But still, like you said, I'll admit, I don't know if she'll like that this is being recorded for people to hear. I've nudged her multiple times and said, why don't you jump into product? You'd make more. You do about the same exact job. Like you have all the skills. I was a product marketer at Facebook in a past life. So I said, like, you can do this. If I could do it, you can definitely do it. It's funny that way. I agree with you. It's underappreciated.
I mean, well, marketing is a product. It's another product you put out. Yeah, it's interesting. There's always that push. I thought it was interesting. I mean, business school is an interesting path for people in tech. I happen to have gone. I don't know that I recommend it. I did it. I'm not, no regrets, but it's obviously not necessary in tech. But the point is like when I was there, which was now like a while ago, like 10, 15 years ago now, but they pushed everyone who wanted to work in tech to want to be a PM. And like, I don't really think that makes that much sense. I think the best PMs often have some technical background as well. And they like didn't push at all for people to go into marketing, which I think is like kind of much better suited for in a lot of ways. And so I found that interesting as well. I just think there's this general push of like go into product and like, I think, product's fun. Like, but I genuinely like really love marketing, which is why like I took a turn as kind of like a founder and investor. And then I was like, I actually just want to be closer to marketing. So there's no shame in wanting to be a marketer. And if you're, a really great marketer, I think you can have an amazing, amazing career. And so, yeah, stop making marketers into product. We need the good ones.
Well, it's funny. It's kind of a good segue into the first thing I wanted to ask you about. Pretty open ended, but I wanted to jump into like, where's the best place to start? What are the things you should be thinking about first if you're starting a startup or you're building a new team and you need to start thinking about marketing activities? And I actually think it's kind of tangential to this point about marketing being a little underappreciated, because if I think about the startups that I've been at, we've never had a marketer to do that. It becomes a hat that somebody else wears, which probably devalues it from the start. You're like, okay, we can't afford to hire this person. We're just going to have this product manager make up how to do it or something like that. There's a weirdness to that.
Yeah, I think there's something funny though even when people don't hire a marketer right away, and I don't necessarily think you need to hire a marketer right away. Like you don't hire a finance person right away, or you don't hire and everyone would say that that's a valuable part of the organization in the future, right? people are wearing many hats, and at the beginning the goal is to, really build a differentiated product that people really need, and then you can layer on the marketing when it will be worthwhile. But anyway, I think the thing that's funny is when startups are like, we never did any marketing. We got here without doing any marketing. And I'm like, no, you maybe got here without a marketer, but like, do you have a website? Marketing. Have you analyzed your audience? Marketing. Have you written a single word or done design? Like, all could be considered marketing. So it's funny, like, not to pick on Slack, but early days of Slack, I was at Asana and Slack was kind of coming up. And I mean, this was forever ago. But like when they got to a certain place and they'd grown really fast and they're like, we've done no marketing. And I'm like, well, do you not consider PR marketing? Cause like Stewart's been everywhere. And so, I mean, they eventually got marketing and like, they had a great marketing team and I think they valued marketing. But at the beginning, I remember them being like, we've done this with no marketing. I'm like, what? And there's lots of companies that have said that, but that one just sort of stung as I sat at Asana and watched rise, right? So everybody's done marketing. And yeah, I mean, the place to start is like a lot of the things that you're doing to understand what product to build also helps marketing. So as I mentioned, like deeply understanding your audience is essential for building a great product that people want and need. It's also essential for doing marketing that gets noticed, resonates, and brings people to your product, right? So that is like a universal thing. Understand your audience, also understanding your market. A lot of the things that we call, product marketing are things that are kind of these universal things that you do to develop a product and to develop marketing. So by understanding your ecosystem, understanding what competitors have built, what the need is, what the problem is, who your audience is, who your ICPs are, like all of that translates over to marketing. So that's usually the place to start. But I think like the first thing that people typically make that's marketing, that's like your first output, is your website. And your website is typically your most important marketing asset. Like all the way, throughout your life cycle, it's your front door. Like almost everyone's, coming to it to log in or to buy or whatever it is. So that's usually the first output of a lot of this research and work you've done to figure out who you're targeting and how you're reaching them.
You've written a lot of really great things about website copy, about people putting too much emphasis on the website, about not putting enough emphasis on their website. Do you have any pro tips of like, what's the first sign? Maybe this is the right way to phrase it. What's the first sign you're going to do a really bad fucking job making your first website? Or there's some like telltale, like if you're doing this, you're already starting with the wrong foot forward.
Yeah. Shipping your pitch deck. With the exception of like maybe your first customers are VCs, but otherwise don't ship your pitch deck. I mean, don't ever ship your pitch deck, but it's a different audience. Oddly, like I worked at Carta for a while and one of our audiences was VC. So I've experienced this weird crossover, but for the vast majority of startups, your audience is not VCs or investors of any kind. And so when you have a different audience, you got to write different words. So don't take the story that's in your pitch deck exactly and put it on your website. The other difference, besides the audience being different, is typically your pitch deck is going to focus a lot more on your team and potentially your vision and the problem you're solving. Whereas like the website needs to tell me why this product is going to solve my problem that I have today, right now. Right. So a little bit of a different emphasis. Now, of course, like some of the work you did to like create a pitch deck, which depending on your order of operations or if you're operating in stealth mode, which I don't recommend, but that's a whole other podcast, right? But sometimes your pitch deck's first, sometimes your website's first. If you're in stealth mode, maybe your pitch deck's first. That was my point. But usually your website. But anyway, I don't even know what I was just talking about. I got hung up on thinking about why I hate stealth mode.
Well, now I have to hear, now that you've gone down that tangent, I think we have to hear why do you hate stealth mode? Why do you think stealth mode is dumb?
Well, I guess there's like the like, unless there's exceptions to every rule. You can be in stealth mode if you're building like truly like groundbreaking technology and don't really want people to like, learn your trade secrets and you're like patenting things and like, groundbreaking new technology. Like I can understand why like early days, like OpenAI stealth mode makes sense. But typically you're hurting yourself by not building your brand as early as possible. Like people aren't going to remember like this founder is in stealth mode. Like it's helpful to have your founder brand and your company brand to start building. And so I just don't think that many startups are truly groundbreaking enough that it's like beneficial to do that. it's beneficial to put yourself out there as much as possible and like learn what's working and ship early and often and all of those things. And so I think you're hindering yourself more often than not. And if you're that worried about the competition, like go back and think about, is your product differentiated enough? And do you have like unique opinions or unique points of view on what you're building and a unique set of skills as founders? Like, are you the best people to do this? And if those things are true, your product's going to be differentiated. You're solving a real pain. The founding team is the best team to do it. The market timing's right. Then you shouldn't have to worry about being in stealth mode or not. So that's all. Like, start building your brand, building product awareness, start getting feedback. So that's all. It's not really that exciting of an answer. So yeah, you're not that important. You don't need to be in stealth mode. Is the negative way of saying that.
I totally agree with you. I think there's some weird mimicry there where like you do see these larger than life like startup gods that people look up to, where when they go into stealth mode, it's a buzzy thing. Like that is their positioning of like, I'm working on something new and don't you want to know what it is? And actually it's probably better for them to create that hype than to talk about whatever dumb thing it is they're building. And then we're going to pick apart that idea.
Yeah, but that's like such a subset of people, right? Like that's such a subset. Like there's just such a finite number. So to copy that, so then people copy that mode that like aren't that. And that's another thing that happens all the time in marketing that isn't a great idea. Like, don't copy someone else's playbook. Like, you're not them. And so that's something that I think, yeah, the playbook has been copied. Also, like, there's a difference between like having a wait list before you're ready to launch or being in beta and like being in total stealth mode. So yeah, I think it's a subset of people. The people that should launch a company in stealth mode, like probably not listening to me talk on a podcast.
Fair point.
This is probably way past needing my advice, right? So anyway, okay. So what were we talking about, Elliot? I don't remember.
Well, actually, I want to pull on that thread of copycat because we're talking about websites a little, and one of the trends that I saw, it's maybe died down a little bit as of late, but maybe 6 months ago, I think I threw up in my mouth every time I saw it. Every website became linear purple, and they had that same freaking bento box. And how do you feel about that as a marketer? Is that there are times where, like, what's that phrase? Like, great artists steal, or whatever that is. There are times to do it. There are times not to. As a marketer, where do you draw the line? What's worth copying, and where should you not cross?
You know, this is a good question. Design trends are always going to happen. Like you see it in like fashion, you see it anywhere where there's like creative. I don't know why I should never be talking about fashion, by the way. I just wear like black all the time. Never. But like you get it. Like, you know, that ends up happening. Like we kind of move towards a certain aesthetic. But for all of this stuff, like you should never really be copying. You always need to figure out, I call them like marketing strategy drivers. I have a framework for all the things, but really like you always need to be figuring out who specifically, like do that product marketing research. Who am I talking to? What's going on in the ecosystem? Who are the competitors and the complements? What are market trends? All of that stuff. As well as like, what are our unique advantages, which I've hinted at? Like, what are our strengths? What are the things that we can win on the marketing side? So that could be anything from like, we have extreme customer love to we have a network effect or we have unique data that we can put out in data reports. Like all of those things are marketing advantages. And actually my funds, our whole thesis was built on the fact that like you need to have a great product and you also need to win on marketing. And to win on marketing, you need to have these marketing advantages and accelerate them, as well as have founders that actually care about go-to-market as well. But you need to have these advantages. So the point is like, you need to look at all this stuff. You need to understand your go-to-market motion and what makes sense for your deal size and deal velocity and all of that stuff, and then build a strategy that works with that go-to-market motion, business model. And then also you need to, well, I guess I covered the marketing advantages thing. So you need to understand all that product marketing research. You need to understand your business model, go-to-market motion, what makes sense for that in terms of marketing strategy. You need to understand your marketing advantages. And from there, then you can figure out your marketing strategy. And that might sound like a lot of things, but it's actually not. Like I can kind of nail down a lot of those things with people, not all the details of who your ICP is and things like that, but nail down a lot of those details within like an hour with a founder, right? And figure out what your marketing advantages are and things like that. And so your strategy and marketing needs to come from that work, that foundational work. And then maybe like you can start copying people. But no, like you got to figure out what those drivers of your strategy are before you go and pick tactics or pick designs or pick colors or pick how your website's going to look. You need to understand that. You need to understand, does my audience care about design? Is it worth like doing something that new, or is it worth having something that's super familiar? And so some of the things about copying another website is, one could call it copying, and one could say that you're trying to have the familiarity of people like, I know how this website progresses and looks, and this makes me feel comfortable, and I feel like this is trustworthy because I've seen it before. And so sometimes that familiarity is great, and sometimes if your audience is really, cares a lot about design, which obviously designers do, or anyone in creative industries do, then you might want to push the envelope and actively not copy when everyone else is doing a dark background. You should go back and do the, white background thing we did a number of years ago. So, I think it just depends.
I'd love to hear more about the marketing advantages, and specifically at what point, if you are early stage startup or a new team, are you retroactively looking back and saying like, okay, we built this product and here are our marketing advantages? Or is that part of the DNA from the beginning where you're thinking to yourself, okay, if I'm going to solve this problem, what marketing advantages could we bake in that would differentiate and allow us to win?
Yeah, I think it's both. Like there are some that you have from day one, and there are some that you develop and lean into over time. But like think about them as these are your differentiators, your strengths, your, on that you have to win at marketing. And so, for instance, great founder story, founder market fit, kind of a day one thing. I mean, unless you pivot, right? But kind of a day one thing. That's a marketing advantage. Like play that up. Make your founder a thought leader, for lack of a better phrase. Like have them share everything they know in some format. So that's something that's from day one. I think like some products are like ripe for network effects and some aren't. And so, but something I see a lot is like, I've identified that companies have like a potential network effect, and even had conversations with founders where they're like, yep, we have a network effect. And then you actually see what they're doing on the marketing side, and they're not like leveraging it at all. Like there are two different audiences using the product that could help, spread the word. And they're not like leveraging that and like telling people what the product is and really like spreading that. And so, or they like are sitting on a very obvious like feature that could drive virality, and they're not building that flywheel. Um, so yeah, that's somewhat like baked into what you're doing, but it's also something to think about when you're building the product. Like, how can we really make this flywheel go, both on the product side and the marketing side? And then there's things that kind of develop over time, or you don't really realize it's an advantage until later. Like, maybe you don't realize that you have a huge demand from your audience for educational content, and you don't realize that like you're going to have tons of inbound traffic, because you've really like struck a chord with something you've created, and you're getting all this inbound traffic. And now that's an advantage. Like we have more inbound traffic than everybody else. So there's like there's some things that, or we have more customer love than we even thought. I think I mentioned that one. Like we can double down. So yeah, they happen over time. So I used to think there were like, I have like a finite number of these. Kathleen and I originally, we were doing our fund, we identified 9. Now I think I have 12. And they're in 4 categories. There's like product driven marketing advantages, network effects, virality, that kind of stuff. There's ecosystem driven advantages. Like there are consultants in this space that we can use to drive growth, that kind of stuff. Or we have tons of integration partners. And then there's kind of content story, or what I call fuel driven advantages, which really like come from the marketing side, but you have that data, you have that customer love, you have that founder story that's really going to help you excel on the content side. And then what I call engine advantages, which engine is like all of your distribution efforts and marketing, all of the growth stuff. And so then there's the engine advantages that come as well. Like we have a really clear like wedge in, and we know who our audience is. If you know exactly who your audience is and you can find them all and like do the research and like know who they are, kind of like shooting a fish in a barrel, which is a phrase that I hate but continue to use. So yeah, they're in 4 categories, and I work with marketers all the time when they're putting together a plan. I'm like, you just have a list of tactics here, like why? And so it's like, well, let's go back and see where you can really win, because the worst thing you can do is like a bunch of what I call random acts of marketing. Like, you can tell I read a newsletter because I'm like what I call, because I have all of these frameworks. It's kind of annoying when you do it out loud, but yeah, you don't want to do just a bunch of random stuff because it's going to ladder up to nothing. So
yeah, totally appreciate that. I'd love to hear, do you have any examples that come to mind of like who Maybe it's a past client, maybe it's just someone who's like a rocket ship company right now that you admire, but who seem to have really nailed these marketing advantages and built it into their DNA, built it into the product from the start?
Yeah. That's a good question. I let me so it's easier for me to like go back and like even think about companies that I was at. So at Carta, like we did a lot of work um growing through doing marketing and trying to grow through lawyers. So we had tons of referrals through lawyers. I think a lot of people realize this now, but at the beginning, maybe it wasn't obvious because you thought maybe, oh, we'll replace lawyers, and lawyers won't have a role in sort of equity management and cap tables anymore, and then they most certainly do still. And so we went through lawyers to drive a lot of growth. And so I think Brex did the same thing with like accountants. So that's an example of having this ecosystem advantage of channel partners. Um, I think at Asana early on, we really had this founder story where the co-founder of Asana started Facebook, and you're like, well, maybe that's not relevant, but he had built this tool internally at Facebook and had lots of opinions on effective ways to work during hypergrowth and things like that we were able to put out on the content side. What's another good one that I haven't worked at? I'm trying to think of like someone that I've invested in. I think there's like lots of companies, and we did this at Carta too. We started putting out data reports, and they still do this in a big way, but where they just like are really leveraging data and putting out interesting reports on like the state of the world. And so like there's tons of companies doing this right now. And that's a trend that I'm really seeing, and building that in, having like an insights person on your team is a thing that people are doing. I think you also see it when people have a wedge, or not people, but companies have like a very clear wedge into a larger market, and they very intentionally say, we're going to start here and we're going to really narrow in and focus and then expand from there. So whether that be like Toast or any company that's kind of like become multi-product kind of does that. So I don't know. Is that helpful? I can probably think of more examples.
No, that's super helpful. It's super interesting. It's interesting hearing the Asana example with Facebook. So one of the things that's been funny with general collaboration is we were trying to talk about the product and pitch what we do to people, and that was resonating okay. And I also worked at Facebook, and the last thing that I worked on before I left was I'd been working on our Portal video calling devices. Pandemic hits. Portal never did well externally, but it became a big part of how Facebook did. We called it future of work. So I was building all this sort of future of work stuff at Facebook, and then eventually quit to do this. Our outreach right now, like where most of our beta testers at least have come from, is outreach that doesn't even mention the product itself. It basically says like, hi, I'm Elliot. I used to do this, and now I'm doing this and building things that I wish I had when I did this. You want to try it too? And it's wild how figuring out those different marketing advantages that you have. At first, I felt awkward about it. I was actually like embarrassed to be talking about working at Facebook. It felt boastful and weird, and that's been huge for us. We call it user research as a Trojan horse, because it starts with user research and then they become a user.
Yeah, no, I think some of the advantages, we talked about this a little bit, but that really happened early on, like given your audience, like, seed stage advantages even, or like pre-seed, are like that founder market fit, or picking that really clear wedge and focus. Like I'm telling so many companies I've invested, focus. Like you might be, and I think we could have done more of this at Asana at the beginning. Like horizontal tools are really hard. Like there's just so much competition. It's so much easier to build products than ever before. Obviously, all of these things we know, but because of that, like really picking a vertical niche, and like again, back to the phrase I keep saying that I don't like to say, shooting fish in a barrel. Like if you're doing that, marketing, sales, much easier when you know who you're targeting, especially with all of these amazing AI tools that allow you to even better identify your audience, like Clay, which I'm an investor in, lets you do this. Like all the more reason to just get specific about who you're targeting. Start with a niche, or if not a niche audience, start with a specific part of your product or feature and really push on that. So those are like, I think, things that I see companies that really take off early. They often have that wedge in advantage, or that founder story, advantage that they really leverage, or that ecosystem play as well can come very early days. Like use third parties to help you grow and don't necessarily go, direct your audience. Like find people that already have credibility, and early stage startups can do that as well, especially if you're like, well networked. In a lot of ways, like using the YC network, like there's the whole thing about like YC companies just selling to YC companies, but that's an ecosystem advantage, like being in fact, maybe that's one of the best reasons to do it at this point, right?
100%. I'd love to talk a little bit about what's probably considered a dirty word. I think we already framed it that way, of tactics. It's like you said before, there are so many. But it feels like you described this well earlier, that like a lot of people, the way that we talk about it is like, we don't want to be just throwing spaghetti at the wall. We don't want to be just like coming up with a list of like,
random acts marketing is what I call it. Yeah, RAM.
So how should a company get started? Are there tactics that need to be tried? I feel like those days of like, I don't know, when I was first getting started in tech, you'd read these articles about like how to do Instagram marketing, or now it's like how to do TikTok marketing. And it was more channel focused than anything else. And people get hyped up on that.
Or it was like, do a blog, right? Like on the content side. It comes back to this advantage stuff. Like figure out how you can win, like figure out where you can win, and like focus on that stuff. Now so I kind of think about it in 3 buckets. I do, because I make a lot of frameworks. Of course, there's always 3 buckets. Maybe sometimes there's 4. But I think about it as you're going to have your big bets, your high impact things that you're going to do. These are like the crazy ideas, the moonshots, whatever. You're going to have the core work that you kind of like have to do to either keep the lights on or get going. That's things like you got to have a website. You should have some very basic SEO in place. So if people are looking for the thing that you do, you're going to show up, like basics. I'm not saying like put all your energy into SEO as any company, no, but like the basics, maybe some paid search, again, basics, low amount of spends, just cover your bases of people are searching for this exact thing and we want to be there. It's kind of like the core stuff. We're going to build out our presence in these various places. Like every company is going to do these basic set of things, and continue to have to do the things that keep the lights on and keep the incremental growth going. And then there's like, obviously all the like ops and behind the scenes work and things you have to do to be able to figure out your big bets and do your core work. And that's things like figuring out your positioning and doing these exercises to like putting in place HubSpot to like hiring people to do this. So there's kind of those 3 buckets: the big bets, the core work, the ops behind the scenes work in marketing. And so to figure out your big bets, you're really looking at those marketing advantages. And to figure out your core stuff at the very beginning, like you are kind of checking boxes. But make sure you don't like you don't need to check like every single box of everything everyone's ever done before. Like there's some fundamentals. And then it's really like start making those big bets, do small tests to figure out what's going to work, and do that from a place of, we have these marketing advantages. How are we going to accelerate them?
How do you keep track of those success of those bets? One of the things we touched on earlier is that a lot of this work it can be hard to quantify. We're not talking about like things that are usually measured. How do you track bets, and what's a success and what's a failure?
Yeah, I think there's actual ways you can track this stuff. Like you essentially like you build out sort of a campaign object in Salesforce or HubSpot, and you start tracking the influence on revenue, not just like what the last touch before they bought was, or the first touch, or where they came from. It's also just like, what are all the things that have touched, have touched this deal in the life cycle. And now we're getting into like attribution, which is not fun to talk about out loud. So I won't talk about it more than that. But I think some of these things is like, when you're doing projects and work, I think it's helpful to know like what's a test and like what is our success criteria. And so like what is our hypothesis? Like what are we trying to figure out? And so, because sometimes people do things they're not like trying to figure something out. So spin back around. And this is why I'm a huge advocate for setting goals in marketing even early on. And they don't have to be like totally like, I don't care if they're in like OKR format or whatever they are, but you need to have like a list of initiatives that you're doing and like why you're doing them. So you can circle back and say, well, did that work? And so I think it's helpful to have kind of that qualitative, why are we doing this, as well as like ultimately implementing some of these ways to track. But early on, like some of the stuff, the success of it is just like, do we feel like this is working? Like, are we getting full traction from this? And you kind of know, much like building features early on. So again, it's a lot more like product than anything else, where like some companies like operate without a product roadmap, but like most don't. Like maybe early days, you kind of know you're doing some of these things that seem really obvious, but eventually you're going to have some sort of list somewhere. I don't care if it's in, you mentioned linear or Asana or Jira, God forbid, or anywhere else, or just like in a note, but you should know like what you're trying and kind of why you're trying it and what the theory is there. So I think there's some like basic intuition kind of things here and just like going back and saying, well, what did we do that worked? And I think the goal setting process, like on a quarterly for that, even if it's just you setting goals and like taking like 2 hours to say, what are we going to do? What work? Let's go back. Let's think about our advantages. Let's think about our audience, think about these things. So kind of going back to your foundation, evaluating the things that you've done, both quantitatively if you have it and qualitatively in either situation, whether you do or you don't have the quantitative, and taking a step back and saying, okay, well, what are we going to actually do to move the needle? I think the thing that I see a lot of marketing teams do, this spaghetti on the wall, random acts of marketing thing, is like what happens is you're only doing things that are ever going to drive like linear or incremental or even flat growth. Like you're never doing anything to like step out of your growth trajectory. And so you've got to like go back and constantly be saying like, what are our big bets? What are the big things we're doing? What are we trying, even if they fail? Or they don't feel right. Sometimes things like do well, but they're really hard for your company to do. They take forever. Like, you know, square peg round hole, like not working. And like that can also be a reason to stop doing something. Like this doesn't feel natural for our company. So I think there's the other thing I was going to say, like, around this is I like to talk about marketing in ways that like, you know, non-marketers can understand. And one of those is like, it's more like product, but another one of those is actually like planning marketing is actually a lot like portfolio strategy for a VC. I didn't realize this until like I was a VC for a few years. A lot of things are like this though, right? Where it's basically like you have a whole portfolio and certain things are going to return the whole portfolio. And so, but every company you invest in, you want them to have a chance of being a winner. And then only some are. But everything that you do has a chance. Like in your, you know, you think it does. And the same thing is true when you're doing like big initiatives in marketing. You want everything of having a chance of being huge and like changing the trajectory for your company. Only a few of those things are actually going to like really move the needle. But you want to think about those things. So you want to think about like your portfolio of marketing bets, and you're not going to do them all at once. But you're going to like build this, you know, portfolio of bets over time, and a few of them will take off, and you're going to double down on those and kind of, you know, let the other ones go away. So yeah, it's kind of like that too.
That's an interesting, you're making, as you say that, you're making me realize that even with some of the ways that we've approached marketing here at GC, that we have a lot of things that we're doing, and we're putting resources into, you know, keeping all these different plates spinning, for lack of a better description. And that, like you said, it's, I don't need to have a bunch of plates spinning. I need one outsized, I need one or two outsized outcomes. Do you recommend dropping some of those plates? Like when you come in as a consultant, are you saying like, look, that's, stop doing blog posts. Nobody gives a shit about your blog posts. That's not working for you. You need to try something else.
I mean, that's my point about like, you have these buckets. You have like your big bets, your core work, and that are going to help you hit the same metrics you've been hitting, keep the lights on. And then you have your like ops and foundational stuff. And like your core work pile keeps going if you don't drop things. And so you've got to always have room to spend like, you know, 10 to 30 to 40% of your time on the big bets. And so I like to even think about sometimes with teams, I'm like, how much time are you spending on the big bets as a team? Even like on like 30, 40 person marketing teams, how much time are you spending on this? How much time are you spending on the core work stuff? And how much time are you spending on the ops stuff? How much time do you want to be spending on these things? And like, how do you get there? And it usually means dropping some of those things. Like you're not going to be great. Very rarely is a company like simultaneously great, especially early on at outbound, inbound, paid, product-led growth stuff, lifecycle marketing, ecosystem. Like those are the big categories of like marketing engines. And you're never going to be great at all those things. Similarly, you're never going to be great at video and newsletter and showing up at events and trade shows with amazing, you know, booths. Is that even a thing? Is amazing booths a paradox? I don't know. But you know, you get the idea. Like you're never going to be great at all of those things. You have to place your bet like a VC.
That's a really great point. That's a really insightful point that I think I'm going to have to take away from this and put it in action.
This whole time I've been trying to say something insightful. I'm glad I did it in the last couple of minutes. But yeah, I mean, that's like the cool thing about like, I wouldn't have really put all that together had I not been the rare combo of marketing VC for a minute. So,
A lot of insightful points. That's just the one that's most actionable of me saying,
oh, thanks. It's okay. Even if there's just one, that's my goal. Just one, you know.
well, that's just, you've caught me saying, oh shit, I need to go and reassess some of the bets that we're making.
I guess like in this conversation, I put a lot of things out there that I thought were kind of good, and like one rose to the top is insightful. So that's how you do marketing.
So on that note, you're not allowed to have a tech podcast in 2024 without talking about AI. So I have to ask you, what's the impact of AI on marketing? I've got some strong opinions here. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are we using it right? Are we using it wrong? How do you feel about AI when it comes to marketing?
I mean, I don't think it matters if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's here and you got to do it, right? Like, I mean, we can like spend time debating good thing, bad thing, but like, doesn't it? You got to do it, right? So I think the thing about AI is it's impacting, every area of marketing, whether you think it or not. Like, I think content's the most obvious, but it's impacting like how you get insights about your audience and stuff on the product marketing side. It's impacting, how you do outbound in a big way on the growth side, and even how you optimize ad campaigns and things like that. So it's everywhere in marketing. It needs to be part of everyone's skill set. But it's not like a silver bullet. You still have to have a clear differentiated strategy. If everyone could do these things faster. So everyone is leveled up. Right now there's maybe some deltas based on how much you're using it, but everyone is leveled up. So when everyone's leveled up, what does it come down to? You still have to have a differentiated, unique strategy. And you still have to like go back to those foundational things I've been talking about this whole time. Understand your audience, understand your advantages, understand the market that you're playing in. And now just like some of the more mundane stuff gets sped up. And now like all the more reason. So I think a lot of it's changed. The tools we're using have changed. Maybe some of the skill sets you need to have changed. But the core of how you do marketing, like going back to first principles thinking, building this foundation, understanding, how you're going to win here, like that's the same and arguably more important than ever because everyone can do the table stakes stuff at a faster velocity. It's kind of the same, again, back to how marketing's like products. It's kind of the same as that. Like we can build products faster than ever before. Doesn't mean we don't have a job. It just means your product needs to be even more differentiated than before.
An interesting conversation that I was having with a friend last week, and I'd love to get your take on this. I think this was a controversial point that I made. I don't even know if I agree with it as I made it, but we were talking about marketing. We were talking about sales. We were talking about that with AI. We're using AI in a way at GC where we're now able to do like sales to the individual in a way that we're a bottoms up single player tool that individuals adopt. So it's where I used to not be able to go like door to door and interact with people as an individual level because sales would have been completely unscalable for our type of business. Now I don't have to do marketing in the traditional sense. I'm doing sales at scale because AI lets me. How do you feel about that? Is marketing as it used to be dying because we can now personalize in this more sales like way?
Well, I would say that sales is dying in that situation.
Okay. Yeah, that's a fair point.
I mean, well, I'm not saying because I think of marketing as one-to-many, automated. Like that's how it's been for a while. Like marketing's one-to-many communication channels. It's like using lots of channels. It's like doing things at scale. Whereas sales is more doing things like one-to-one. And I think one-to-one is now like many in a one-to-one way, right? So I don't know what's dying, but like again, go-to-market's changing. Obviously, like personalization, more possible. Figuring out exactly who your audience is, where they are, all that stuff more possible. Making content faster, all those things are possible, but everybody's going to start doing them. Everyone's going to start doing these things. So things will change because of that. So again, like lots of things changing, got to stay on top of it. But the core principles of how you do it, I think are the same.
Cool. And then one last question. What advice would you give to an aspiring marketer, product manager, designer, engineer, someone at an early stage company who's looking to make impact in marketing in startup world? What singular advice would you give somebody to get started?
Yeah, I think like I have a funny answer, which is something that I like is in my brain all the time. And maybe this is a bad thing to say, but it's don't be good at a bad job, which is it's just like something I think about. Like my boss at Asana was like, don't tell anyone you're good at making slides because you're just gonna get stuck making slides all day. I love making slides, but don't tell people because then that's all you're gonna do. Everybody's gonna be like, I'm gonna make my slides. So that's one like funny way of thinking about it. But I think it's, like being successful in your career is like what I was just talking about with marketing again, or like VC. It's like you gotta like place your bets, and you've gotta like do things that um stand out, and like, and so you've got to take some chances. And so if you just like, sit there doing incremental things, you're kind of like going to grow slowly. But if you take a chance on a startup, or you take a chance on an idea, or you take a chance on like a hire that can potentially elevate you like crazy, like all of these things, like I think that's where how you advance quickly. So yeah, place your bets. And also like so much of startups is luck. And so you can be completely prepared, but like, well, I think that helps. Like, don't compare yourself to everybody else and be like, well, how did they get there? Why did they do this? Like, a lot of it, like, if you're prepared and talented and smart and all of these things, like, there's so much luck. And so recognize that that can strike you at any time too, right? So I think that, like, but I think there's so much comparing of yourself to others, and like, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and you don't know what's really going on. And so, um, stop comparing yourself, I guess, is the other thing. So that's a lot of advice. um I guess like the biggest thing that has changed in my career, or that has changed, I think, my happiness and my like peace of mind, is just like not trying to live up to any other expectation, like other than like what makes you happy and what you like to do, like truly. Because like, had I been worried about like reputation and expectation, I wouldn't have done half the things I did. I wouldn't have raised a fund and then decided, oh, I'm not a VC after all. Like, I'd like just love marketing. Like, you wouldn't decide these things. And so I think a lot of it is like, as you get older, more experienced in this, is just like realizing that like you got to follow your own path, create your own path, and like do what makes you happy, which is what I'm trying to do now. And honestly, like I did 6 months of chemo a number of years ago, and that's like when I was like, I don't need to work in startups anymore. I don't need to be a CMO anymore. I can chart my own path, and I think I'm like more successful than I've ever been. So uh yeah.
Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank goodness that you went in and started Market One, because you pump out some incredible content. Hopefully, this will be some of that content like that. To close out, where can people follow you? What are the best links to hit up to be able to see all your work?
Yeah. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, I think mostly is where I share a lot of the stuff. And then my newsletter is newsletter.mkt1.co. It's also on Substack. And those are the best places.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Emily. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful that you took the
Yeah,
time to
no
come on
problem.
the Honey Five
I had a
podcast.
good time. And yeah, thanks for listening if you made it all the way through.
Thanks. Bye.